Learning how to play with the initiative in chess is a very important skill to develop. Now, you might have heard of the word initiative, but what does the word initiative really mean in chess? And how can we use it to our advantage when we're trying to attack our opponents? Playing with the initiative means you are the side that are making threats that your opponent cannot ignore, which in turn makes your opponent spend their turns responding to your threats instead of creating threats of their own. And that in turn leads to you being the one playing with an advantage. Here's an example of a rapid game that I played that I believe effectively demonstrates the basics of playing with the initiative when attacking your opponent. So in this rapid game, we started off playing a Nimzo Indian, where, as you can see, for quite a lot of the beginning of the moves, we were just playing standard theory and exchange variation, and everything was going smoothly. After h6, there tends to be 3 lines. You can play bishop h4, bishop f4, or take an f6. I want to keep things a little bit more simple, so I decided to trade off in bishop right away. Anyway, I kept playing some book moves. I was just trying to develop my pieces and castle, and as I was getting ready to castle, my opponent played the move bishop to h3. Not a very common move, offering me to take their bishop in exchange for doubling my pawns while they get the piece back. So I automatically knew this is not something that I wanted to go for. My position looks pretty horrible here. So I was trying to figure out, firstly, how I wanted to defend the pawn, but also secondly, if I really wanted to defend the pawn. One common idea is to allow your opponent to take the pawn on g2, specifically if they've castled on the king side. Because what can happen is it completely opens up the g-file, and you can stack your rooks, your queen, and a lot of pieces on the g-file and start to form an attack. So with that in mind, I had 2 options. I could either decide to castle, which was my first candidate move, keeping the king safe, keeping it simple, and just leaving their bishop here with no purpose. Or I could choose to move my knight away, which in turn would force the bishop to move, because if not, I'm going to take it, and there's no piece here to take anymore. So I decided to play the move knight to e5. I decided to go what I thought was a bit more of an aggressive approach, forcing the bishop to move again. Now at this point, I thought, okay, I kind of have a tempo move on the bishop. They'll play bishop back maybe to e6. I'll castle, and it'll be a game from there, and I think they just wasted one move moving the bishop to h3. But instead, they decided to take the bait, and they took the pawn on g2. Now, whenever you're going to give up material in chess, whether it's a pawn, whether it's a piece, whether it's your castling rights, whatever it is, you need to make sure that you have a plan to get the compensation back for whatever you're giving up. For example, I'm choosing to give up a pawn on g2, and in turn, I'm also choosing to give away my castling rights basically on the king side. I'm not really going to want to ever castle on the king side anymore because this g-file is completely open and because I don't have king safety on the king side anymore. So I have to make losing this pawn worth it. And this is where tempo moves started becoming a thing, and I felt like the initiative was slowly coming over to my side as I found a way to come up with an attack that forced my opponent to respond to every move that I was making. So here I started off with the move rook to g1, again, threatening the bishop and also utilizing this open file that I sacrificed my pawn for, so that is my compensation and I need to try to make something happen on this file. They played bishop h3, and the minute that I see this file is open, the first thing that comes to mind is let me try to double my rooks as fast as I can because I'll be making some threats on this pawn on g7 here. So how do I do that? Well, again, I'm thinking, playing with the initiative, those tempo moves make them respond to the moves that I'm making. So I played the move rook to g3, preparing to double up my rooks and attacking the bishop, so they have to respond to that. They played the move bishop to e6, and I want to double up rooks, my king's in the way, so combine the two, and I queenside castled. Now, this in itself isn't a threat per se, but I am threatening to play rook g1 on the next move, and I'm getting my king safe at the same time. And here you can see my opponent spent 4 moves with their bishop. They played bishop to h3, then they took the pawn, they moved back, they got attacked again, and they moved back to e6. And in that time, they've gained 1 pawn, but they haven't developed their knights. They haven't connected their rooks because of that. Their queen is not in the best square in my opinion, especially since I castled queenside. They ideally want all their pieces starting to shift over to the queenside. But they also don't have any attack prepared on the queenside either because they spend so many moves greedily trying to capture a pawn and escape. So here my opponent plays a natural move, knight d7, just trying to finish up their development. But at this point, I already feel like the initiative is in my hands. So I have to be careful because I obviously don't want to give up my pawn. There's 2 attackers from my opponent and only 1 defender for me. I don't want to move my knight backwards because I feel like that's going to be a little bit passive, whether I go here or here. Those are the only 2 safe squares. And I don't want to trade. I've already given up material. I can feel an attack forming, so I don't want to liquidate the position because that's only going to make my opponent's life easier and give me less pieces to attack with. So that leaves me to reinforce the knight on e5. And again, with an aggressive move, I play f4. Solidifying the knight in the center, advancing my pawns towards the king side, which is where I'm trying to attack. And here my opponent decides to take on e5. This, I believe, is a critical moment in the game because I think it matters what pawn I take back with. And a lot of times I also see a lot of players immediately recapture when they have more than one option. In a lot of cases, the recapture might be obvious as to what to take back with, but sometimes you want to take those extra few seconds and just think, what piece is best to take with and why? The f-pawn seemed enticing at first because it opens up the f-file, and if I'm trying to attack on the king side, wouldn't I want both these files open? However, if I capture with the d-pawn like I did in the game, I realized that it not only gets tempo on the queen, it also helps me get tempo on the bishop. Because my f-pawn is still here, I'm able to play f5 on the next move as well and hit this bishop. And in turn, for hitting the bishop as I move up, I'm next getting ready to prepare the move f6, and with all this pressure on the g-file, this g-pawn is under some heat. I also have my bishop and queen lined up on this diagonal, so they're never going to really want to play the move g6 either, because that's a sacrifice calling to me to happen. So I think this is a critical move. Had I taken with the f-pawn, I don't think my advantage would have been as severe as it was, and I also would not have any pawns on the king side to attack with anymore and give me those tempo moves, which increases my initiative. So I played the move queen to h4, and I got tempo on the queen. Now I want to try to make another threat, so finishing off my idea, I play rook d to g1, lining up to attack this pawn. And here it's pretty hard to say what my opponent can really do to defend their position. If they play a move like g6, as we talked about, I'm ready, I'm waiting to sack. Bishop takes g6, and I have more than one option too. While I think this move is totally fine and still puts me in a winning position, I also have the move f5 here. Again, we talked about this pawn earlier, a very crucial component to this attack. It hits the bishop, it hits the pawn. They can't recapture, because if they recapture, this pawn is pinned, so they just lose a piece. And let's say their bishop moves back. This pawn becomes so powerful, I recapture on g6. Now I'm threatening to push this pawn forward. I'm threatening to capture the pawn on f7, just blasting open the g-file. And I'm not only winning with the material back that I gave up at the beginning of the game, I'm gaining it back with a completely crushing attack. My opponent plays rook c8, trying to make lift for their king. And after I win the pawn, get my material back, and play the move f5, my opponent resigns. A killer of a position here as whites. And in not even 20 moves, I'm able to win the game. So, a beautiful attack, I think, from whites. Every move I made had purpose. I was trying to capitalize on the fact that my opponent was lacking in development, was spending a bunch of moves with their bishop. And every move I made, my pieces were connecting with the end goal to attack on the king side. I was developing all my pieces were working together, and most of the moves that I made, my opponent had to respond to, and in turn, as you can see, they had no time to even push a queenside pawn or even move their rooks out of their given positions. This bishop was basically a pawn on e6 at this point. It was blocked both ways, and I just paved a very simple path to victory, playing with the initiative every move, and finally converting my attack. So again, I found this game of mine quite instructive, since it demonstrates the basics of converting an attack while playing with the initiative. And I didn't do anything fancy, but every move I played had purpose, working towards my goals, and I didn't give my opponent any time to make a counterattack or improve their position after they went for the pawn on g2. So I hope you enjoyed this example. Hopefully some tips within this game can help you the next time you're trying to figure out how to efficiently attack your opponents, or moves to play, or things to think about when you have the initiative. Thanks for watching, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.